It's time for the Douglas Coleman Show. Mr. Smooth and Savvy is joined by guests from all walks of life, from the entertainment industry to authors to political and social commentators, the famous and not so famous, the controversial and the light and fluffy. We have it all. Now, here's Douglas Coleman.
Hello. Welcome to the Douglas Coleman Show. It's me, Douglas Coleman. How are you? Thank you for joining us. We've got Edward Willett here today. Edward is a Canadian author of more than 60 books of science fiction, fantasy, and nonfiction for readers of all ages. His latest book, The Moonlit World, is his 11th novel, and he will tell us about that. He's also the recipient of Canada's Aurora Award, and he's got a podcast called the World Shapers Podcast. For more information on Edward, you can check out his website at edwardwillett.com, edwardwillett.com. After the interview, we've got 3 tracks to play from Music Submissions. Thank you to everybody who's been submitting on Music Submit. We get a lot of great music through them, and we're always very happy to play it on the show. First one up is called OK OK by Dizzybox9, followed by God and Country by John Cuputo, and to wrap it up, Slow Burn by The PH Project. So, a lot to get to in this show today. We will be right back with Edward Willett.
You're listening to Mr. Smooth and Savvy right here on the Douglas Coleman Show. We'll be right back after these commercial messages.
Hi there, this is Stuart Epps, record producer. This is my story about Elton John, working with him in those early years, going back to 1967 at Dick James, all the amazing tours, those first recordings, going through to Rocket Records. And it's an amazing story about his incredible rise to stardom and my part in that. So look forward to taking you on that journey. So here we go. Yeah, and to order this great audio CD, please just email me at stuartepps@talk21.com. That's Stuart, Stuart, Epps, EPPS, at talk, TALK, 21 in figures.com. Stuart Epps at talk21.com. Email me and I'll give you all the details for buying this brilliant audio disc. Thank you. Bye.
DJC Music and DJC Productions are pleased to announce a brand new website. We have started a listing website for radio show hosts as well as potential show guests. This is a meeting site where hosts and guests can come together. Show hosts can list their show and types of guests they're interested in booking. Potential guests can list their talents, bio, accomplishments, or anything they feel makes them an interesting radio show guest. There are no recurrent payments, only a one-time $5 listing fee. Your listing will stay up until you decide to cancel. Previous guests of the Douglas Coleman Show are welcome to submit their guest listing free of charge. Go to radiohostsandguests.com. That's radiohostsandguests.com.
Tired of living in a culture of lies, fake news, and alternative facts? The Pro-Truth Pledge reverses the tide of lies by calling on politicians, and everyone else, to commit to truth-oriented behaviors. The pledge asks signees to commit to 12 behaviors that research in behavioral science shows lead to truthfulness, such as clarifying one's opinions and the facts, citing one's sources, and celebrating people who update their beliefs toward the truth. Private citizens who sign the pledge get the benefit of contributing to a more truth-oriented society. Public figures get more substantive rewards for signing the pledge in the form of positive media and public recognition. The pledge crowdsources the truth by asking volunteers to evaluate the statements of public figures who sign the pledge. Take the pledge, demand that your elected representatives do so, and encourage your friends to take it at protruthpledge.org.
Are you an independent musician? How would you like to have your songs played on hundreds of radio stations just like the one you're listening to right now? Join MusicSubmit.com and we'll promote your music to radio stations and blogs in your genre. It's free to set up your account, and we guarantee your music will be considered for airplay by radio stations worldwide. Why not sign up today? It's free. MusicSubmit.com. Radio promotion for indie musicians.
The show's about to start!
I'm coming as fast as I can.
And now...
Hey, Rocky, watch me pull a rabbit out of my hat.
Again?
Nothing up my sleeve. Presto! Ooh, don't know my own strength.
Now here's something we hope you'll really like.
Okay. Hi, Ed. How are you? Do you go by Ed or Edward?
Great. Yes, I go by Ed. Well, the people that know me most recently call me Ed. I can tell when people knew me as a kid because they call me Eddie, but I haven't used that for a while.
Okay. Well, Ed works. So how are you? Thank you for coming on the show.
I'm fine, and I'm very happy to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
You are an author from Canada? Is that correct?
Yes, although I was actually born in the States. We moved up here from Texas when I was 8 years old. I've lived up here ever since, although I did go to school in Arkansas, of all places.
Oh, wow. So where in Canada are you?
I'm in Regina, Saskatchewan.
Ah, okay. And you're an author. According to your bio, you've written more than 60 books. Wow. How long did it take you to write 60 books?
Well, I've been a full-time freelancer since 1993. My first book came out in 95. It was using Microsoft Publisher for Windows 95, a very exciting book. And so I guess it's taken me 25 years to write that many books. A lot of them are short. They're like for educational publishers, so they're 15,000 words or something or less. So I don't want to make it sound like they're all 100,000 word opuses.
Okay. So what genres do you write in?
I write science fiction, fantasy, and nonfiction for readers of all ages. So I've written in all of those categories for both adults, young adults, and in some cases quite small children. So just about anything with words I'm willing to tackle. I've also done plays and plays with music. Magazine articles, newspaper articles, all sorts of stuff.
Do you remember the first thing that you had published?
I do. It was in Cat Fancy magazine. I was about 12, maybe. And they used to have a section called Young Authors Open, and I submitted a really terrible pun about the search for a new Santa Claus, and Santa discovers this guy that looks perfect, but realizes as he watches him over the summer that his garden is overgrown with weeds and that he'll never do a Santa Claus because he wouldn't ho, ho, ho. That was my first published story.
Oh. What is a Aurora Award? I've noticed that you won one. I had no idea what it is.
The Aurora Award is sort of the Canadian equivalent of the Hugo Award, which is much better known. It's an award that is nominated for and voted on by science fiction and fantasy fans in Canada, members of the Canadian Science Fiction and Fantasy Association. Anyone can join as long as they're Canadian and or living in Canada. So it's a fan voted on award. It's been going on for a long time now, and it is Canada's top science fiction award.
What inspires you to write? Do you do this as a 9-to-5 job, or does something have to kind of spark you to get you going?
I always say that it's like a muscle that you exercise. I've been writing since, I told you my first story was published, but my first short story I remember writing, I was 11 years old, and it was called Castor Glass Hypership Test Pilot. So you could see that I was pretty much set on the science fiction genre from the beginning. And I loved telling stories. I was a huge reader, and I wanted to tell stories to people that they would enjoy as much as I had enjoyed the stories that I had read from the authors that I enjoyed. And so I started writing, and I have just kept doing it. So I was a newspaper reporter and a photographer, and one of the great things about working for a newspaper, this was a weekly newspaper, so I was doing everything: photography and sports reporting and covering city council and writing features every week. You have to produce the words. I had a weekly column because the paper comes out whether you're ready or not. So there's no writer's block. There's no I can't write today. And at this point, I would say that if I sit down in front of a keyboard with the desire to write, I can write. So inspiration, I think it's a thing that you learn. You learn to capture the ideas that are all around you, and then the question is just which ones do you decide to spend the time on to develop into a full story or novel.
Well, is it easier to get inspired to write nonfiction than fiction?
Well, usually with nonfiction, I have a more immediate deadline, and I know that I will get paid promptly when I write it. So sometimes that's an inspiration. Nonfiction is never my first choice just for something to write. My goal was always to be a full-time fiction writer, but the nonfiction has helped to make that happen because by doing a mixture of nonfiction and fiction, and I'm also an actor. I've done stage plays and I sing and all that sort of stuff. I've put together an awful lot of different streams that I can sometimes make some money from, and so I prefer writing fiction. Nonfiction is usually given to me, as in, we would like you to write a story about this or interview this guy and write a story. So in that case, I don't really need inspiration for nonfiction. I just need somebody to say, hi, we'd like to pay you to write this. Will you do it? And I'll usually say, I sure will.
You've also got a podcast called the World Shapers Podcast?
Yes, I started that. My current series from DAW Books is called World Shapers. And the podcast started at the same time as that series did. It's up to the third book, which was just released, The Moonlit World. And so I'd always thought about a podcast because I have hosted my own radio and TV programs over the years. And of course, as I mentioned, I'm a journalist by training, so I've interviewed everybody under the sun. And I thought, well, I have some interviewing skills, and I have the voice. So I thought I would start this podcast, and that fact that World Shaper series was starting up was kind of the impetus, because the series itself is about people who live inside worlds that they have shaped, which is like authors living inside worlds that they have written. And I've always enjoyed talking to authors about the creative process, so I just kind of put all that together, and I've been interviewing science fiction and fantasy authors very specifically about the creative process. We talk about how they got started, interested in writing, started writing. We talk about usually focusing on one book of their choice. We talk about idea generation, planning, outlining, writing, revising, editing. And at the end, I ask big philosophical questions like, why? Why do you write? Why does anybody write? And why write science fiction and fantasy in particular? Every episode is about an hour, and I've just been amazed at the people who've been willing to talk to me. I've had some of the biggest names in the field, international bestsellers, and award winners of all sorts. It's been fun, and it won an Aurora Award for Best Fan-Related Work in 2019 and was shortlisted again this year, although it didn't win.
Do you have any common thread or commonalities that you've noticed between all of these people that you interview?
Well, of course, the obvious thing is that they are driven to tell stories, and I always ask that question, why, at the end. And you get varying answers, but it basically comes down to, for most people, that they simply can't not do it. Sometimes they'll say it's the only thing that keeps them sane. I've had people say that, these voices in their heads, they have to put them down on paper. It's just something that there's a spark in humanity to tell tales, and that is a thread that runs through everybody that I've talked to, that they feel compelled to tell stories. And humans have been doing that for a very long time, and if you're doing it at a high level, then perhaps you become a published writer, and you do that all the time. And I think that's the common thread. When it comes to the actual writing process, the one thing that the World Shapers podcast clearly demonstrates is that everybody does it differently. So you have authors who do detailed outlines, like tens or hundreds of page outlines in some cases, before they ever start writing, and other people who just have the idea and then they just kind of start, and everything in between. So the great thing about it is learning all the different ways that people tell stories.
When you're telling a story, is the story something that you want to convey in a particular way? In other words, let's say you wanted to talk about farmers. Why would you write it differently than somebody else? Does that make sense?
one reason that it's called the World Shapers is that we sometimes talk about world building in science fiction and fantasy, but in fact, none of us are really building worlds from scratch. We are taking the real world and what we know of it, so from our own backgrounds, our own experiences, and we take all that and we shape it into this story. So I think that every author tells the story differently because of what they bring to it. So in my case, I was a newspaper reporter in a small town, 10,000 people in Saskatchewan. We covered agriculture. I talked to farmers. I interviewed farmers. I used to call up the grain elevators and see if they were suffering from any congestion at harvest time. Farm reports, all that stuff. So I would undoubtedly bring something different to that than somebody who perhaps grew up in a big city, never knew a farmer, maybe never even been on a farm. They would have to take a completely different approach to the story, and I think that's true of everything we write. We can't help but put ourselves into it, in the characters we create, in the narrative that we choose to tell, in the inspiration for writing the story in the first place. I have written a science fiction farm story. It was about it's called Strange Harvest, and it was about a small town newspaper reporter who had people bringing in weird vegetables like exploding tomatoes and tear gas onions and things like that. And it turned out that aliens had taken over a farm and were growing this stuff as they're plant aliens, intelligent plants, and they want to liberate plants on Earth from animals. So that's the way that I literally did a farm story like that, and that came out of my experience as a small town newspaper editor and reporter. And having been out on those farms and driving around, I talked about the grasshoppers bouncing off the car and things like that. So yeah, any topic I choose to write about is going to undoubtedly draw on my personal background and upbringing and everything like that, and that's true for every author.
You have a new book out, which is called The Moonlit World. Tell us a little about it.
Well, this is book 3 in my World Shapers series. The World Shapers is set in a labyrinth of shaped worlds. As I said, it's sort of like authors living inside the worlds they create. All of these shapers came from our world originally and were trained by a mysterious woman called Aurora. And then when they graduated, they were basically handed a blank world and they could do what they wanted with it. In the first book, my main character, Shauna Keys, is introduced. She thinks she's living in the only world. She's forgotten that she's the shaper of the world she's in. But there's a terrible attack that happens, and she undoes it and doesn't understand how she did that. And then Carl Yatzer, who's the other main character, shows up, explains that she's the shaper of this world, and that this adversary was the one who attacked her, and that he's now stolen the knowledge of the making of her world, and he's going to take it away from her. But she has the power to perhaps save other worlds if she'll just come with him to the other worlds, and they can gather the knowledge of those worlds and take it to Aurora, who is now hiding somewhere in the labyrinth. So that's the basic premise. The first book takes them across her version of our world, which is almost the same, but not quite. The second book was called Master of the World, and it was set in a world shaped by somebody who really likes Jules Verne. So it had strange airships and submarines and all that great stuff. And then this current one, the Moonlit World, is set in a world where the moon is always shining, and it was shaped by someone who really likes werewolves and vampires. So that's the kind of world it is. There are werewolves and vampires. They're at each other's throats, literally. And they're also ordinary people. So my working title in my head was Werewolves and Vampires and Peasants, oh my! And my characters have to navigate this very dangerous world, find the shaper of it, gather the knowledge of that shaper, and then try to get out into the next world. So yeah, that's the Moonlit World. It's my opportunity to tell werewolf and vampire stories.
Well, my guest is Edward Willett. The book is available, I assume. Is it out?
It came out yesterday as we were recording this, yes.
Okay. And it's available on Amazon, I assume, and
it should be available anywhere or orderable by any bookstore. It's out from DAW Books, which is under Penguin Random House, so widely distributed.
Okay. And do you have a website you want to give out?
I do. It's edwardwillett.com, EDWARDWILLETT.com. There is one other project I want to mention real quick. I mentioned the World Shapers. There's also an anthology of short fiction by people who were on that podcast during the first year. It's called Shapers of Worlds. It'll be out in ebook September 22nd and out in print November 14th. And you can find out about that at my website, edwardwillett.com. And the World Shapers itself is theworldshapers.com.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. Enjoyed talking to you. Best of luck with your books.
Thanks for having me on. Thank you.
Hi, this is John Morgan, Production Supervisor for DJC Productions. You're listening to The Douglas Coleman Show.
You heard the church bells ringing from every corner. The smell of mama's cooking got us sat up in bed. We listened to the preacher give a Sunday sermon. He kept us good by feeding us our daily bread. Oh, I'll miss America for way back when. I want you more than ever, I need you back again. School today don't have a prayer. The seeds of evil have crept in. Too many people don't think it's fair. We replace God's word with our weapons. Oh, I'll miss America from way back when. I want you more than ever, I need you back again. Well, today's old glory's still red, white, and blue, but it's fading. It's not politically correct to say that we're one nation under God. And we no longer stand beside the country that our fathers created. No more liberty and justice for us, because we stopped believing I need you back again, Lord. Today's old glory's still red, white, and blue, but it's fading. It's not politically correct to say that we're one nation under God. And we no longer stand beside the country that our fathers created. No more liberty and justice for us, because we stopped believing in the God that we trusted.
I thought about you all day until the sun went down. You set my heart on fire. My world is upside down. Take your time, there's no rush. Well, this is more than just a crush. You and I, we're both the same. So strike a match and fan the flame. Dream about you all night, my angel in the dark. You are my twin flame lover. You are my morning star. So shine on me night and day, 'cause I'm in this all the way. Well, you and I, we're both the same. So strike a match and fan the flame. Oh! So burn, that's how you like it. So burn, I like it too. So burn, we're both on fire. You burn for me, and I burn for you. That's how you like it. So burn, I like it too. So burn, we're both on fire. You burn for me, and I burn